My son's future wife gave me only bread at a fancy French restaurant, saying it was all I deserved because I'm poor. But then her father arrived late and was shocked to see me thrown at me. Instead of a warm greeting during a family gathering just before my son's wedding was a remark that hit hard in front of me. A baguette from an upscale French restaurant rested on a glass plate, a symbol of unexpected humiliation served by my son's fiancée. I had raised my son Christopher on my own, and never did I imagine such a moment of degradation. As a 55-year-old housewife widowed early in life, I had dedicated myself to nurturing Christopher. This year, he turned 25, graduated from college, and secured a job, becoming the pride of my life. Despite his success, he chose to continue living with me in the house left by his late father. I cherished the idea of spending more time with him. However, my world took an unexpected turn when Christopher revealed he had a girlfriend and intended to marry her. Initially shocked, I soon embraced the news with genuine joy, expressing my happiness at his growth. Christopher, still living with me, promised to bring her home soon, but the opportunity didn't materialize. Curiosity and anticipation built up in me, and when I finally asked about her, Christopher shared some details. Her name was Roy, 4 years older than him, and she worked as a tutor from a family of teachers. The revelation surprised me, and I wondered about their relationship, but I patiently waited to meet her. Time passed, and 2 months went by without a meeting. The absence of Roy started feeling intentional. Fate intervened when, by chance, I overheard a conversation during lunch. Seated back to back with the woman, she complained loudly about her upcoming family meeting before the wedding. Intrigued, I listened as she expressed a deliberate intention to delay meeting the family, wanting to test Christopher's commitment to their relationship and prove he was not a mama's boy. The unexpected encounter left me contemplating the dynamics at play. Realizing that fate could be both intriguing and frightening, she said it, and I nearly turned around. Christopher's name echoed in the air, causing a slight dizziness. Her friend's advice to Roy, "You need to be more humble," confirmed the woman, loudly discussing her future mother-in-law, was none other than Christopher's fiancée. Holding my coffee cup, my hand trembled and my friend, sensing my distress, asked if I was okay. I mechanically ate the recommended dessert. My mind fixated on escaping that place as quickly as possible. Unaware of my presence, Roy continued her complaints about her family. She belittled the concept of a single-mother family, comparing it to her supposedly superior educational background. Roy labeled me a clinging mother and spoke about making Christopher abandon me after the wedding. Fear overwhelmed any anger I felt. The conflict between mother-in-law and daughter-in-law had begun prematurely. Even before the family meeting or the wedding, Roy showcased her disdain. Yet she was the woman Christopher chose. I tried to reassure myself that there must be something wonderful about her back home. I attempted to calm my nerves, resolving not to tell Christopher about this incident alone. I stopped pushing him about the family meeting. I knew she had no intention of attending, and I refused to continuously be looked down upon by being too accommodating. Christopher sensed my change of heart, but didn't press further. "It's okay, if you're busy whenever it's convenient for you," I told him, trying to ease his burden. The wedding plans between Christopher and Roy seemed to progress faster than the family meeting. Spotting a wedding venue brochure on the living room table, I realized the countdown had begun. I contemplated speaking up about the wrong order of things, but refrained for my son's sake. Making a fuss would lead to accusations of being unable to let go or being a mama's boy, baseless accusations that would upset me. Christopher was crucial to me, but he was an independent adulthood. I had refrained from interfering more than necessary, demonstrating my tolerance. One morning, Christopher abruptly announced a family meeting with the in-laws. They had reserved a fancy French restaurant, and he wanted me to come. The meeting was scheduled in 2 days, a sudden announcement that left me a bit irritated. Shouldn't such things be planned after matching everyone's schedules? I held back my frustration, saying, "All right, I haven't formally met Roy yet, so it's good to meet her sooner." Christopher apologized for the sudden. The plan in my mind was that Roy and her family should be the ones apologizing, not him. I reassured him that it was fine. On the day of the family meeting, Christopher and I arrived at the designated upscale French restaurant. I felt a bit nervous. It was my first time at such a fancy place. Christopher chuckled, acknowledging the nerve-wracking atmosphere. As we gave our name to the staff, we were guided to a private room where Roy's family had already gathered. Roy and her mother, Mara, were present. Excusing ourselves, I opened the door to the private room. Seated there were Mara, exuding a definite teacher vibe, and Roy, sporting slightly flashy makeup. Her dress seemed mismatched, likely chosen by Mara for the occasion. Roy and Mara remained silent until I finished my greetings, their scrutiny palpable, as if evaluating me as a lesser presence. Christopher, familiar with Mary, greeted her with long time no see. Mara chuckled, mentioning that she had been looking forward to meeting the famous single mother, her words carrying a slight sting, suppressing any reaction. I played it down, emphasizing Christopher's inexperience and suggesting they take care of him. Mara, contentedly nodding, maintained an air of superiority, her demeanor hinting at how she might treat her students and their parents, an attitude I wouldn't desire for my child. She invited me to sit, yet Roy still hadn't greeted me. With reluctance, I initiated conversation, prompting Roy to respond with a mocking snort, deeming repetition inefficient. Her arrogant remarks stirred anger within me, but I restrained my temper. She was the woman Christopher had chosen. I feigned calmness, acknowledging her comment with forced civility, though I felt close to my limit. Mara informed us that Roy's father would be late due to work and suggested we proceed without him. Roy then made a seemingly innocent comment to Christopher, insinuating his lack of exposure to such lavish food due to his past poverty. Christopher, unfazed, went along with her comment. I had always known Christopher to be kind and patient, but this situation seemed beyond that. Concerns about how he navigated society started to creep in. Was he possibly being taken advantage of? A parental worry nagged at me. Ignoring the odd expressions from Roy and Mara, I suggested we enjoy the feast. However, their unpleasant smiles intensified, and the reason behind their mockery soon became apparent. As the first dish arrived on a beautifully decorated plate, I couldn't help but exclaim at the sight of the simple baguette on the glass plate. Roy and Mara seemed to find this hilariously amusing, laughing heartily at my shocked expression. It turned out that the owner of the upscale French restaurant was Mara's brother, and they had collaborated to ridicule me. The poor. That suits you best, Roy said, openly mocking me. Christopher, now pale, and I were left in disbelief. Trying to contain my anger, I muttered about how this supposedly suited a poor person like me. Roy misinterpreted my reaction, thinking I was crying. Dismissing it, she laughed even harder. Surprisingly, Mara, who might have been expected to scold Roy, only said, "Oh dear, Roy," without any intention of reprimanding her. I couldn't bear the idea of such individuals becoming part of my family. Just as I raised my bowed head, Roy's father entered, apologizing for being late witnessing the baguette situation. He seemed taken aback. Roy proudly explained that she had the baguette prepared, thinking that I, raised in poverty, hadn't experienced such cuisine. Her father scolded her for taking the joke too far, but he couldn't hide his amusement. The thought of them becoming my family was unbearable. As the father turned pale, I looked up and recognized him, Cedric, the principal of a private high school where I had been facing difficulties. I expressed my surprise, and he exclaimed in shock, revealing that he had become the principal 3 years ago. Instead of dwelling on educational policies, I couldn't resist suggesting he pay more attention to education at home, especially considering the insult from his daughter, something I vowed never to forget. I stared down at him. He had always berated me, claiming that a single mother couldn't be a principal. He had spread rumors that I couldn't properly educate my own child. Roy, realizing the impact of her actions, seemed taken aback, and Mara trembled, lost for words. I looked at each member of Roy's family and slowly bit into the baguette, the sound of me crunching, echoing in the room. Delicious, as expected from a high-end French restaurant. Baguette, I said, smiling as I held out the glass plate with the baguette. Cedric's hand trembled amusingly as he took it. After that meeting, I went back home with Christopher, my head spinning with anger and humiliation. He seemed devastated, the cruel words from Roy still echoing in his mind. I knew he was as hurt as I was, if not more. He had always protected me, always made sure I was okay. And now, the woman he chose was clearly showing that I meant nothing to her. But I kept my expression serene. Christopher was an adult, and this was his choice. Even if this choice was leading me to emotional ruin, I needed to think about how to handle it. But that night, as I heard Christopher sobbing quietly in the room next door, something inside me snapped. I couldn't allow that woman and her snobbish family to destroy everything Christopher and I had built together. I decided that if Roy thought I was just the poor mother, I would show her that being poor didn't mean being weak, and that she had messed with the wrong person. The next day, I began planning. I took an old notebook out of the drawer and started writing down everything I remembered about that night and the previous meetings. Every little detail, every malicious word Roy or Mara had said, everything would be used to my advantage. I knew I had to be careful. People like them always tried to escape the consequences of their cruelty, believing no one would dare confront them. But I was no longer the woman who bowed down to the powerful. First, I went looking for information on Cedric. He was the type of man who kept his secrets well hidden, but I knew some mothers of students at that school, and I knew he was no saint. After a few calls, I found out there were several complaints against him, mostly for mistreating employees and even intimidating some students whose parents were not wealthy. The mothers who were frustrated with how their children were treated opened up to me, telling stories that only strengthened my resolve. He had power in the school, but outside of it, he was just another coward using his position to humiliate the weaker. I needed proof, and fortunately, one of the mothers had recordings of conversations where Cedric threatened a student. When she sent me that, I felt the first glimmer of hope. That was the beginning of my revenge. Meanwhile, I continued acting normally at home. When Christopher asked if I was okay, I smiled and said yes, that I was happy for him, and that everything would be fine. He didn't need to know what I was doing, at least not yet. My mission was to protect him, and I would do so, even if he didn't understand at the moment. The next step was dealing with Roy. I knew she was confident, thinking I was a defeated woman. So I made sure to schedule a meeting with her. I sent her a message inviting her for coffee, something informal. She accepted, perhaps thinking I was ready to beg or try to please her. On the day of the meeting, we met at a cafe downtown. She arrived with a smug smile, her eyes shining with arrogance. "So, what do you want?" she asked, crossing her arms, clearly uninterested. "I wanted to get to know the woman my son chose to marry better," I began, pretending a gentle smile. "I know we had a rough start, and I wanted to clear the air." She laughed, a cold, sarcastic laugh. "There's not much to clear up, is there? I just think Christopher deserves more. He shouldn't spend his whole life stuck with you, a woman who couldn't do anything but be a mother." Her words hit me like knives, but I kept my composure. "I understand that you feel that way." I looked directly into her eyes, a firm gaze that made her smile falter for a moment. "But I need to warn you about something. Don't underestimate a mother who's willing to protect her son. No matter what you think of me, Roy. In the end, what matters is what I know and what I am capable of doing to ensure Christopher doesn't regret his choices." Roy went silent, her eyes narrowing. She wasn't expecting that. Maybe she had imagined I would apologize, that I would accept the role of a submissive mother. But no, this was a war, and I was just getting started. After that meeting, things sped up. I gathered more information about Cedric, and finally, I was ready to act. A month before the wedding, I made a point of going to the school, where Cedric was the principal. I asked to speak with him in his office, and he, surprised, received me. I sat in the chair across from his desk and pulled a flash drive out of my purse. "I have something you'll want to hear, Cedric." He looked confused at first, but as he listened to the recordings of the threats he had made, his face began to lose color. I smiled, without any kindness. He tried to argue, to threaten, but now he was in my hands. I demanded that he stop supporting the humiliation his daughter was doing to me and, most importantly, that he talk to Roy and make her change her attitude. Otherwise, everything I had would end up in the hands of the school board and the local media. Cedric, the coward that he was, gave in. He knew that would destroy his career and prestige. And I wouldn't stop there. I also sent a copy of the recordings to Mara, with a note explaining that if Roy's behavior continued, I would take legal action against them for defamation and public humiliation. Mara tried to call me, but I didn't answer. She knew I had the power to destroy their image. A week before the wedding, Roy showed up at my house, unannounced. She was pale, and her eyes no longer had the arrogance they once did. I invited her in and waited for her to speak. "I came to apologize," she said, with evident difficulty. I watched her for a moment, seeing the internal battle she fought to swallow her pride. I knew those apologies were not sincere, they were forced by fear. But I wanted Christopher to see this. I called my son to the living room, and when he arrived, he saw Roy apologizing to me. He looked confused, but also relieved. I just smiled, accepting the apology, although I knew this story wasn't over yet. On the wedding day, I went with my head held high. I knew who those people were, and I knew that if necessary, I had the power to expose all the sordid secrets of Roy's family. During the ceremony, Cedric and Mara cast anxious glances at me, and Roy could barely look at me. And me? I was calm. I knew that if anyone dared to try to humiliate me again, I wouldn't hesitate to take them down. and that they would never forget the day they messed with the wrong woman. After Christopher's wedding, something definitively changed in the dynamic between me and Roy's family. They never made any more nasty comments or tried to humiliate me again. In fact, they practically disappeared from my life, something that, although I didn't like at first, I began to see as a blessing. It allowed me to move on, to focus on what was truly important for me and my son. I knew I needed a change in my life. The whole situation had made me realize that I wanted more than just dedicating myself to my son, especially now that he had built his own family. So I decided to bet on something that had always brought me joy: cooking. I always loved making homemade sweets, and my friends and neighbors always praised my cakes, pies, and chocolates. That's how the idea came about. Why not turn my passion into a business? I started small, selling my sweets at local markets and to people I knew in the neighborhood. At first, it was simple, something I made in my home kitchen, but soon the demand began to grow. People loved the authentic flavors, the fresh ingredients, and the care I put into each sweet. I dedicated myself to each recipe, experimenting with new flavors, creating sweets that brought back childhood memories and comfort. That's how Mom's Delights was born, a name I chose in honor of the most important role in my life: being a mother. Years went by, and with a lot of hard work, dedication, and sleepless nights, Mom's Delights grew. From selling to neighbors and friends, I began selling in small shops, and then I managed to open my first physical store. And to my surprise and joy, the store was a success. People appreciated not just the sweets, but also the welcoming atmosphere and the simplicity of the place. Over time, I opened more branches and hired staff to help me. I never imagined that my passion for sweets would turn into something so grand, but there I was, years later, with a chain of stores, earning much more money than I ever thought possible. Despite all this, I chose to live a modest life. My home remained the same comfortable house left by my late husband, and my lifestyle stayed simple. I didn't need luxury. My satisfaction came from the work, from the sweets that made people smile, and from the time I spent with Christopher and, eventually, my grandchildren. Then, years later, something curious happened. I was informed by my team that we had received a special request for an important event. They wanted to hire our services to provide the entire dessert buffet for a vow renewal ceremony. It was a large-scale event, and, of course, the client was willing to pay a significant amount for the service. My company was already known for quality and the care we put into every detail, so this type of request was not uncommon. I no longer got involved directly with events, but, out of curiosity, I asked to see the details. And that's when I saw the names: Roy and Christopher. They were renewing their wedding vows. I laughed to myself upon seeing that, feeling a strange satisfaction. They had chosen my company for one of the most important moments of their lives, without even knowing it was mine. The event took place in one of the most luxurious venues in the city, and the dessert buffet was an absolute success. We received praise for the taste, the presentation, and the quality of everything. Roy and Christopher, along with all the guests, enjoyed the sweets I had created years ago in my home kitchen when it was still just a distant dream. I imagined Roy tasting one of my chocolates, never suspecting that the woman she once despised was the one responsible for that sweet and memorable moment. When the vow renewal happened, I wasn't there. I didn't need to be. Knowing that my company, the result of my effort and resilience, had been hired for a high price by those who once tried to humiliate me was the best silent revenge I could have. I didn't need confrontations, sharp words, or fights. I simply moved on, worked hard, and in the end, I achieved something they could never take from me: my dignity and my peace. And so, I continued my life, watching my business grow even more and enjoying every moment with my grandchildren. What more could I wish for? I had won, not because I had more money or prestige, but because I had built something from nothing, because I had kept my essence, and because, in the end, the real victory was living in peace, far away from toxic people, with a clear conscience.